Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, this budget was a resounding disappointment. The Prime Minister indicated he needed an opportunity to refocus his government and suspended Parliament for 6 weeks to do so. Canadians had high expectations. Canadian families are still reeling from the recession, and we're looking to this government for initiatives that would help stabilize the economy, create jobs, and increase productivity. This Conservative government has failed to do anything about the jobless recovery the country is currently experiencing. Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page tells us there are 400,000 more unemployed today than in 2008, and people are staying unemployed longer. Youth unemployment is double the average of the national unemployment rate. For many communities around Canada, sustainable full-time jobs have been replaced by lower-paying, unsustainable part-time jobs. With the loss of 300,000 jobs and the rise in unemployment forecasted in the federal budget, Canadians are wondering what exactly it was the Prime Minister meant when he said he needed to recalibrate. On top of this budget, this budget contains $13 billion payroll tax on small business. And we all know that small business is the engine of growth in small communities in particular. Naturally, those small businesses will think twice about hiring, and there is a very real possibility of a further loss of 200,000 jobs because of this short-sighted measure. Jobs are hard to come by in small rural communities at best, especially when those communities bear the brunt of the recession. Mr. Speaker, the health of any economy is measured by the degree of employment. And I have only to look at the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, where the unemployment rate is approximately 15%, and even higher in my own riding of Brandon, Buren, St. George's, where it is approximately 24%, to know that we are indeed in a jobless recovery, and extra measures need to be taken to help create employment opportunities for Canadians. Many families in the riding of Brandon, Buren, St. George's, for instance, know only too well about having to leave home and go to work elsewhere in this country. And that is not what this should be about, Mr. Speaker. This should be about creating employment opportunities in the place where Canadians live. Mr. Speaker, I fail to understand how it is a government cannot see the benefits of having people employed. Employment means paying taxes to the Treasury. Unemployment means receiving benefits from the unemployment program administered by the government, or if an individual isn't eligible for unemployment benefits, relying on the provincial government for benefits from the social programs it administers. Not only is the health of the economy measured by the degree of employment, but the health of Canadians is affected by employment. It is well known that people who have a job are healthier and in a better frame of mind overall than someone who is unemployed and clearly stressed because of it. Mr. Speaker, this budget is very evasive about where the cuts will fall. On this side of the House, we suggested the government start with the $1.2 billion in wasteful spending that has gone into partisan public relations, advertising, and self-promotion. This government has spent well over $100 million for economic action plan ads alone, funds that could be far more effectively distributed to assist vulnerable Canadians. And I would sincerely hope that instead of cutting valuable programs that help Canadians, that this government will cut their own waste first.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, one of the ports of call for Marine Atlantic is in my riding, and everyone associated with the service provided by Marine Atlantic has been asking for funding that will allow the organization to implement a long-term plan. Even the Auditor General is on record as indicating the ferry service is at risk because of its aging fleet, which leaves it unreliable. In fact, the Auditor General was very specific and said $1.6 billion is required to meet the challenges confronting Marine Atlantic. Marine Atlantic is a critical part of Atlantic Canada's transportation system and essential to Newfoundland and Labrador's economic well-being and the well-being of the people of the province, who have no choice but to rely on the service for fresh produce and other necessities. While I'm pleased to see that Marine Atlantic was mentioned in this year's budget after being ignored last year, I am concerned that the funding provided does little to address these long-term needs. The government has been told repeatedly of the need to replace the fleet that services Marine Atlantic, and the need for infrastructure improvements. Yet the government has not acknowledged the need for a long-term plan. While $175 million over 2 years is welcome news, there is no indication in the budget of the $1.6 billion stated by the Auditor General as the investment required to address the shortcomings in Marine Atlantic in its current form. Clearly, if $1.6 billion is required to fix the service so it won't be at risk, as stated by the Auditor General, without it, the risk will continue to exist, and the fear is this essential service will continue to deteriorate. Mr. Speaker, the shipbuilding industry is an important component of the economy of the Atlantic provinces. Budget 2009 did little for the industry, with $175 million, and the 2010 budget does little more. Because of the timing of contracts, the federal government will spend $82 million this year on shipbuilding and another $93 million next year. But there is the outstanding question, Madam Speaker, that remains on the minds and the people of the Burin Peninsula in particular, in my riding, about the contract that the government was ready to award just hours before the last federal election. It was a $2.9 billion contract for the construction of 3 joint supply ships for the Canadian Navy. The contract would have meant 700 jobs over 8 or 9 years in a rural area of the country where jobs are scarce. And it would have been at the shipyard in Marystown, in my riding, which has a reputation for doing excellent work on time and on budget. The contract itself was for $2.1 billion, and associated with it was an $800 million 20-year service contract. And to quote the mayor of Marystown, getting the contracts would make Marystown's economy rock like a continuous AC/DC concert.
That's great.
So, Mr. Speaker, what happened to the contract to build those joint supply ships for the Canadian Navy? At the time the contract was cancelled, the Federal Minister of Public Works said the price shipbuilders wanted to build new vessels was more than anticipated. But according to one of the shipbuilders involved in the bidding, the decision to cancel the bidding process shows the government isn't keeping up with industry price increases. This is problematic, Madam Speaker, when the involvement of the federal government is crucial to the health of the shipbuilding industry in the country. Madam Speaker, this government continues to ignore the industries which play a vital role in the economy of Atlantic Canada. Once again, we see the fishery being shortchanged by the Conservative government. The only mention of the fishery is the funding to ensure the seafood industry maintains access to the key markets around the world through the new Catch Certification Office. This is included because the European Union introduced a new regulation which requires exploring countries to provide catch certificates, or exporting countries to provide catch certificates attesting that marine fish and seafood products are legally harvested. If it wasn't for these European Union regulations, Madam Speaker, there would be no mention of the fishery, an industry that has been looking to the federal government to work with it to restructure the industry. Madam Speaker, I have enormous pride for the many residents of Brandon, Burin, and St. George's who are currently serving our nation and the world through the Canadian military. From my riding alone, there are 820 men and women serving in all sectors of the Canadian Forces. Our veterans are the heroes of our nation. We owe it to them to listen to their concerns and ensure they receive the help and support that they and their families deserve and need when they return from active duty. 1 in 5 veterans who are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome will attempt suicide. There are tremendous challenges facing modern-day veterans and their families. These are the men and women who put their lives on the line for the safety of Canadians and the future of democracy around the world. They need our help. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, how could this government not respond to some of the issues that previous speakers have raised and are in keeping with the same issues that I've raised here today? Yet they can continue to spend money on promoting Canada's Economic Action Plan, spend money on the Minister of Finance traveling around the country promoting the budget, and the list goes on. With Canada's aging population in the midst of a pension crisis, Canadians look to this government for action. Instead, we get a Seniors' Day. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments?